Hi there everyone, welcome to another episode of the Better SMB. In this episode we debrief our recent article in the New Zealand Manufacturing magazine, Leadership from the Top, and it starts from the government level right through to SMB owners and leaders. We put the challenge out there for leadership, driving excellence, and it doesn't need government support, but it is a choice of upping our game around leadership and lead by example. Anyway, before you go and listen to this episode, please support the Better SMB by liking and following us. It really does make a difference. Well, that's enough for me. Let's get on with it. On with the show.
Welcome back to the Better SMB, where we're on a mission to lift New Zealand's productivity by helping small and medium business leaders take practical steps to improve their business performance, starting today. I'm David Altena.
And I'm Rob Bull.
We've created this platform to spark a movement. Our BHAG is to get 100,000 businesses, that includes 15,000 manufacturers, on a journey of continuous improvement. Through the podcast, our monthly column, The Last Word, a New Zealand manufacturer, and our growing community, we're building a trusted voice for SMB leaders, offering the inspiration, insight, and implementation support they need to build high-performing, future-ready businesses. Today, we're going behind our NZ Manufacturer July article, Leadership from the Top, how government must reflect what it asks of business. And asking a tough but necessary question, are public institutions holding themselves to the same standard they expect from business? In our episode with Minister Chris Penk, we heard encouraging signs about more transparency in government, focusing on outcomes and enabling innovation. But is that the exception or the beginning of something bigger? Today, we're exploring what true leadership from the top looks like across the system, not just at the ministerial level. We'll dive into why consistent leadership matters, how misalignment between sectors still holds us back, and what it's going to take to drive a real productivity and business performance shift from the beehive to the boardroom to the factory floor. Before we get into that, Rob, you've spent a bit of time looking into some current affairs that we think are worth calling out. Something a bit new for us. Do you want to kick us off with that?
Yeah, so we always talk about, some of the ideas that we've got, the articles, we've got amazing guests that we've had and we're going to have. I'm loving that list that keeps on growing, and those emails that we keep sending each other about people who want to come on. But I really just want to start calling out some of the things that have been happening over the last couple of weeks between all of our different recordings. And the first one is hot off the press, is the tariffs from Donald Trump. Now, we called it, what was it, about October, November last year, around tariffs, just as before Trump was coming into power. And we were expecting 20% back there. And it has come through at 15%. There's all that panic, doom and gloom that's coming out there, particularly through the media. All I want to say about that is go back to that episode, listen to our views on what tariffs should be an opportunity rather than panic stations and hitting the old skies falling down on our heads. So that's all I want to say about that. Anything on your part with tariffs, Dave?
Well, 15%. We talked about 20, so you had to free up an extra day a week. So if you've done that, you're already on the winning side. Right, 15%,
absolutely.
You've got an extra 5 points sitting in your pocket. Happy days.
And particularly if you are exporting to more than just the US, you're now making more money out in all the other countries that you're exporting to. Now, the second update was the passport name change. Now, I teach a lot of my companies and clients around the Eisenhower matrix. And so for those who are unfamiliar with it, it's effort versus impact matrix. And you pretty much plot the activities of all the improvement ideas, all the innovation ideas that you have in the organisation around effort versus impact. And whoever slipped through working public time and effort on passport name changes, this is going to be really good around tonight's subject anyway, from leading from the top. But surely this is one that sits down on the high effort and minimal impact. It shouldn't have gone through. There's bigger fish to fry. There's bigger impacts for our economy, for our exporting, for all of those things. What the heck does a passport name change in the order Aotearoa and New Zealand? It doesn't matter. Who cares? Move on.
Hang on. Tell me about this. Passport name change. What do you mean? We're changing the name of what passports are?
No, all it is changing the order of the English word New Zealand and Aotearoa.
Really?
Yep. We have spent government time and effort and agencies to, wow, this is a major impact. This is going to change everyone's world. Who actually gives AF? That's all I want to say. Now, the most interesting one, it has been out there in the media, but it's taken a while for me to even pick it up, is the National Infrastructure Plan. So this is really interesting. So there is one Infrastructure Commission. The CEO is Jeff Cooper, and he made a really interesting statement as they were publicising this draft innovation. I was hoping it might be innovation, but this draft National Infrastructure Plan, which is out for consultation, so you can hunt it out and read it and go through it and provide feedback. But of all the episodes we've talked about getting better and working smarter, here's a statement for you to chew on. In New Zealand, our infrastructure spend is in the top 10%, or it is greater than most high-earning economies, but we're in the bottom 10% of getting value from that spend. Wrap your head around that. From a GDP percentile point of view, we spend in the top 10%, yet we get 10%, or we're in the bottom 10% of getting value from that spend. In that plan, and I know you're going to be gagging to do a response to that, there are 17 projects. Now, tell me, when politicians talk about infrastructure, they love to throw productivity improvements on that whole discussion. Tell me if you can guess where nearly half of those projects are focused on.
It's got to be roading.
Not roading. There might be roading there, but there are 6, 7, 8 that I picked out that were really interesting. 6 were in defence. One was the Reserve Bank Cash Centre and building a new vault, and the Hawke's Bay Regional Prison upgrade. I don't see anything about productivity in there. So anyway, I just wanted to get comment around about our massive spend for sort of results. So that's my sort of news of the week, really, for our podcast.
The National Infrastructure Commission, I'm just looking, they were founded in 2019. So they've come up with a list of 17 projects, by the sounds of it.
Yep.
And, of those projects, a whole bunch of them were probably already in flight, but whatever. And they've managed to come out with this headline stat that we're in the top 10% of OECD countries for our spend, but the bottom 10% for bang for buck.
Bingo.
6 years worth of work.
Is this not another commission that should be going the same way as the Productivity Commission? And when you think that over half of them are in effectively government-based agencies, Defence, Reserve Bank, and a prison.
Get a new safe for the Reserve Bank. I mean, when was the last time someone broke into the previous one and it wasn't adequate?
Do we have spare cash? I don't know. Anyway, all I want to say out of that, Jeff Cooper, if any of our listeners, or if Jeff actually listens to this podcast, we'd love to have a chat. Come on board. Follow Minister Penk, and we'd love to get someone in that space to talk to us about how infrastructure planning, spending helps productivity in New Zealand.
Wow. Getting back to Minister Penk, we had a great chat with him, and one of the things that really stood out to me was that he acknowledged that our government or governments by nature act as a monopoly. They have no competition. There's no real external pressure to improve, which is a massive contrast to business, where if we don't execute, we lose customers, staff, relevance, ultimately we go under. And yet we've got the government departments telling us as business owners, we've got to lift productivity, we've got to innovate and lead. Well, that's fair to a certain extent, but only if the people saying it are holding themselves to the same bar. Do you think they are?
A bit of disclosure, really. I spent 20 odd plus years in the health sector, and the latter half of that in some senior roles in what was the DHBs and primary health sector. All I can say is there are a lot of people doing a lot of good, hard work, making hard decisions, particularly around budgeting and supporting services. But there is never a sense of urgency. There's just, after coming back out of that sector and working into the private sector and working with SMEs around New Zealand, the sense of decision making and getting shit done quickly is just not there. And I think there is a bit of fear of getting it wrong, because you get chewed by the public if you do. Or if you try and make a fast decision and it might not be perfect, you get chewed by the minister. So I think that there is sometimes a paralysis of fear that goes out there. It is a tough gig, but I certainly think that we can set some guidelines, or certainly set some inspiration, or at least challenge some of those agencies to work a little bit smarter around just even their performance. And I think when we talk about performance, that even makes me think around the KPIs or the performance indicators that they are measured by. And maybe we've probably got the dial wrong on those ones.
So let's go from top level government and let's start talking about typical SMBs. So when you're working with an SMB, what type of metrics do you see them either holding themselves to, or you're looking to hold them to?
Okay, thinking around manufacturing world, which this is a debrief around our article in New Zealand Manufacturing Magazine, there are a couple of gold standard ones that I will always use. And the lag measure, so the outcome measure, will always be your delivery in full, on time, and inspect. And you learned that from Dave Bunting's episode, David. So that DIFOTUS, that should always be your gold standard. If you are delivering, in the 80s to 90s, or if you're freakish like Dave and his team in the 99.6% range, you're hitting good customer service and good outcomes. Something's going right.
Excellent at that level. Insane level.
Stupidly insane. And so that's one of them. Then definitely follow the learnings from W. Edwards Deming. So this is not just me talking. This is science and research that have gone on for decades, and yet New Zealand never picks it up and runs with it. But good old Deming, he will talk about quality in the process and measure that quality within a process. So that's your rework rates, that's your inventory, anything that slows the system down. So if you had to slow or stop production, stop work, I would be counting those basic measures, because if you can get all of that right, you should be hitting your DIFOTUS relatively solid. It could be response rate to initial inquiries, which all of those classic customer experience metrics, right through to your percentage of rework or even the cost of rework. And one of my favorite ones is always planned versus actual. So when you are making something, what was the planned or budgeted hours or cost or use of materials, but what was actually done? And is that above or below what you planned for? Because that either way will tell you something that's going right or wrong in your system. Because if you're building something, if you're creating something, if you're producing something that is well under what you budgeted for, then you've got to look at your budgeting process or your planning process. So they are all indicators that something's not quite aligned with reality and what's actually going on the shop floor.
What do you think that would look like in the public sector? What are those measures that we can start thinking about? Because let's face it, the public sector technically doesn't produce anything. It's their job to create the playing field for us to all do business on.
Yeah, and I think this really goes down sector by sector, to be honest, because education will be vastly different to health if you're looking at those two well-known and well-utilised sectors. And certainly leaning into my experience in the health sector, again, have we got the indicators right? And it all depends on your perspective of the health sector, because the number of surgeries performed, is that a great measure, or is it the number of preventative surgeries? And this goes, there's a whole philosophical health approach around that. So this is where it becomes challenging, but it doesn't mean that it is impossible to go there. So I haven't quite answered that one because it is tricky, and I do get it.
So shout out to the Future Focus podcast that I was on recently. And we started talking about this idea of innovation, but innovation across the system. The Future Focus podcast is more focused on the education space, but you've mentioned probably two of the most expensive areas of government. Maybe retirement might be the third. We dump more and more and more money into education and health. And much like what we just talked about with the Infrastructure Commission, I think that was right, wasn't it?
Yep.
We're putting more money in, and proportionately we're getting less back as a result. And I'm not seeing anything happening at a government level that suggests we're turning that around anytime soon.
No, and I think it is a matter of making decisions, getting plans out, and really putting accountability up at the senior levels of all of those government sector industries. This is what David Seymour's been trying to get at with some of his ideas that he's been trying to get across the line. The challenge for leadership really there is looking at the quality throughput. You can certainly look at the size of teams around the output, and I'm talking about those who are sitting in Wellington or at least working from home for a Wellington-based agency, and comparing that to your private sector. I mean, how many actual actionable reports can get delivered, decisions that are made on time with a realistic budget? Because I know on the other end, being on the receiving end of some of those decision making, you could be waiting months to get a decision made. How many times have we heard, we're considering that and the decision will be out in October or November, which is 3 or 4 months away. Why does those decisions have to take so long? If we know what the direction is, why?
I reckon there's someone out there in media land who could probably get a whole bunch of pre-election promises, regardless of colour of political party, and then actually determine what percentage has been delivered. In fact, that would be a fascinating thing for a university to pick up as some form of research project where you go, this is what was promised, this is what was delivered, here's the result. And whether multi-term governments are actually better at delivering or not. When we look at the government in general, I think feels like there's a lack of follow-through. We get all these strategies and, they've just come out with the AI strategy. There's strategies that have no metrics. We've got year-to-year budgets and we have no ability to think about long-term execution because ultimately after any election they're reset. When you've got this going on at a government level, if you're trying to run a business, how can you expect to be able to invest the long term when government budgets are operating year to year?
And I think it's all also about action orientated, right? So we've talked about reports, and we've mentioned the myriad of reports that get thrown out, certainly from Wellington, a number of times on this podcast. and I can't remember what order we're throwing our episodes out, so please correct me, but this episode's coming out before we release our conversation with Patrick McKibben from Hutt Valley Chamber of Commerce. He would be a great example, and those listeners will have to wait for that episode to come out, but he'll be a great example with their 35 by 35 plan, is one that is action orientated. And we talked about measures, right? How that plan was delivered earlier this year. How many actions have they actually really delivered? So your planned versus actual. Well, you've planned X events or X or Y initiatives by July, by August, by October. So it is really delivering outcomes based on some really good thinking that has been documented. And that's what I think. When you go back to some of the foundation theories around leadership, and I go back to Deming, and his first principle out of 14 was really setting that constancy of purpose. So it is setting that true north, but actually start doing something about it. And I think that that's missing in a lot of that sort of government leadership. Yes, we can throw a report, but when is the actions, and what are the ones that are actually delivering to that report on time?
I think this raises this, perhaps I'm stating the obvious, but there's a real credibility and trust gap. It's a little bit uncomfortable, right? Can our government really lead the ability to turn productivity around at a national level? Firstly, given their track record, I wouldn't think they can, but a lot of their own systems aren't even delivering. At a grassroots level, do you think SMBs trust the people setting the rules and for those people to actually be living them themselves?
I think the SMB sector has a really awesome opportunity to lead it themselves. If there was enough momentum happening that they could actually drive the direction that needs to go. And we've done back of the envelope conversations. This is our 100,000 businesses in 10 years.
35. Yeah.
By 2035, okay? And I've done the back of the envelope. If we started with 6 or 7 businesses and that are really champion it, like the Dave Buntings, if we had 6 or 7 of those mentoring 6 businesses each for a year to lift up that performance, lifting up the focus on excellence, lifting up the focus on quality, which we know are the lead indicators for productivity. Now, after year 1, if those 6 go and mentor 6 more, and then that 6 by 6, and it's only 9 years, we will hit that 100,000 SMEs. That takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of time out of people's calendars. But is that breaking it down like that? I think what SMEs don't really need to have confidence, or they don't need to really have trust or anything around what's coming out of the government, is I think the opportunity is there going, right, we've been talking about this since 1970 odd, as long as I've been alive, and nothing really has changed. So we've even, at the start of this conversation, we talk about the National Infrastructure Draft Plan, which is a 30-year plan and already has some traction for cross-party collaboration, but it's going to be 12 to 18 months before it's signed off. We know this. In fact, I'll say it's going to be 12 months because it's election year next year, so they will definitely sign it off and get the first action over the line and say how good they are at setting the plan and delivering on it already. But by that stage, we could have had 36 businesses aiming for excellence.
Yeah, and I'd love to see if we could get 1, 2, 3, 6 of those businesses reaching out to us. I mean, if we could get 3 businesses working with 6 other businesses. So if you're a business that is high performing, or if you're a business that's looking to be connected to a high performing business, we'd love to hear from you and we'll broker that, absolutely. Because we are going to need to do this from the ground up so that once we've got businesses moving, we can actually then connect them to the right things going on in government. And Minister Penk, he called out a couple of shifts, right? So he's throwing out the performance data that he's getting from building consent authorities. So that's a small step towards accountability. It's actually quite good. That might be a one-off, but he talked about a couple of other government departments. So in some ways, the wheels of government might be gradually starting to get going, right? But we're still at the very early stages. And what we really need is real leadership, and we need to look at people who are modeling that. We need to focus on those people, because ultimately what happens with government, and we're seeing it now with EVs and better fuel economy cars, we're getting less money from petrol tax. So what do we have to do? Oh, we have to put road user charges on EVs, and we're probably going to have to raise petrol tax because we're not getting enough money. So we talked about this in the article, this idea of an easy button. And our government and our councils are great at it. We'll just up taxes, we'll just up rates. Every year our rates go up. Yet in business, if we make poor decisions, if we overspend, we wear the cost, right? Our margins drop, maybe customers leave, might go under. But in government, they're just going to add a tax, introduce a levy, create another layer of compliance. So we called this out in the article. And the other interesting thing is those costs ultimately just get passed on to business owners, and there's no real link to better outcomes. Minister Penk talked about the idea that Crown entities operate as monopolies. They expand, public spending escalates, and there's no connection to improve services or outcomes. Now, you're working with businesses trying to manage all this. What's it look like when extra costs show up, but there's no added value in return?
I'll come back to that one, because while you're talking about it, we've been doing it, and we will have it up on our website shortly. But imagine a time when you've got all the key government agencies, and I wouldn't say all of them, because there are some that are probably too small or too diverse, but there's a public dashboard, performance dashboard for all the key metrics for each of those agencies. And there would be a balance between those quality throughput metrics and also outputs. Now that will be tough, but what are the 6 ones you could do for education, for health, for all the other different agents, so all the social services? If there was a website you could go and click on a button to whatever one that's relevant for you, then what are those key metrics? What is it for police? What is it for the armed forces? What is it for corrections agencies? And clicking on those key metrics. And it's not about spend. Coming back to your question, when costs come out that are unexpected, or it's usually because of a quality issue that's arisen between round jobs. And so what we do, have these dashboards, but they're based more around performance metrics. And by the time we see the cost, we already know that the quality issue has risen, and it's getting the teams to stop work, sort out, do a root cause analysis. It might be an hour or two's worth of work. Write a list of countermeasures. What can we do to get this back on track, and start implementing those? And it could be half a dozen initiatives, or it could be a dozen small and large fixes. But it's about stopping, quickly fixing. It's having the ability to do that, having the skill sets to do that, and the empowerment, so the authority for anyone at any level of the team to stop and fix those problems. And this goes back to the whole ethos of Toyota. Anyone can pull what was called the and-on cord. So the cord right next to every workstation in the factory. If there was a quality issue, if doors getting scratched continuously and they've seen 2 or 3 doors come through, anyone has the ability and the authority to pull that cord, stop it, fix it before it becomes a major cost to your business. So to answer your question is, if there's a major unexpected cost coming up in the P&L, my question is, why didn't we spot that while it was still a minor cost and fix it?
That sounds dangerously like innovation to me.
Well, it goes back from leadership from the top, right? You can't delegate good, excellent performance. One, if you how political shall I go? No, I'm going to go deep into this, right? We are talking about government agencies, and it is local government time. And it is a hugely funny moment around, particularly in the Waikato. We've got councillors who are just announced our restanding. Surprise, surprise, because of all of the things that they posted on social media. And there was one, particularly last week, that caught my eye, and it was a set meeting of all the Hamilton City councillors, and they were getting prepped and debriefed around, I think it was infrastructure actually, that was coming up quite a lot. And yet 3 councillors had turned up on time. 2 were late but had put in their apologies to be late. 1 was at Tangi. So less than half had turned up to a pre-arranged set meeting. Yet if they turn around to any of their departments in the city council and sort of draw the line around performance and excellence, what do you think response you're going to get? One of the best books I read was by Barley Patter, and Barley is an ex-chief operating officer at Lego, and they had a rule where the senior management, and this is the managing director included, because Lego is still a family-owned operation, and their senior startup meeting every Monday starts at, I think it was 8 o'clock. They lock the doors at 8 o'clock. If you're not there in their war room where they had all their performance metrics and their data and all the dashboards, they lock the door. You didn't get to participate in the decision making. So this goes back to that whole statement that we have as leadership from the top. You can't delegate this excellence. If you can't turn up to a meeting prepared and ready for a decision, you're not going to expect any of your team members or any of the departments that are accountable to you. Why would they toe the line? And then you see that performance just drift off. And you go back to Dave Bunting, which was the feedback that we've got from that episode is outstanding. And his was that deliberate excellence.
It's not sexy.
None of this is sexy. Going back to any of the local or even central government performance and leadership, it is really looking at the basics. And if you want great outcomes in your city, in your country, in your departments, in the operational teams, it starts from the top. And I think for those who are really interested in local government, go online and look up. Apparently, the attendance rate for meetings are publicly available. It will be a really interesting read, because I think some of your councillors who are getting paid reasonable money, some of them not so, but they might be about down to the 20% mark of attendance.
Could come into some of those KPIs that we could look at. So this idea of that easy button, in my mind, it undermines innovation, because what it's doing is we drive up costs, and you can pretty much allow for councils raising rates every year. So if you're renting a commercial property, guess what? That cost gets passed on to you. So you then need to choose, am I passing this on to my clients, or am I absorbing it? Therefore, I'm going to make less money as a result. That makes our businesses less competitive at a global level, because those costs ripple their way through the system, whether you're getting a haircut somewhere or whether you're working with the organisation that supplies you something that you're exporting, which ultimately means we're pulling money away from long-term investment. These short-term price increases and technically they're compounding increases, don't allow us to innovate from a systemic perspective. Now, Minister Penk gave a great example around the building code, where he's talking about this idea of industry saying, well, why can't you trust us to deliver the quality outcomes, even if the method changes? Now, I can't remember if he said it has been implemented or that's something they're looking to implement. But if they do implement that, the great thing is that's outcome focused and enables innovation. But it's only one portfolio. So how do we get that mindset system-wide?
On that building one, I'm pretty sure it's going to come out, because I heard another minister talk about it just last week. in a public forum, and it was more of good practice overseas is 4 to 5 inspections for a house build, and we've got something like 29. Let's trust our good operators at least. And, they might have to jump through a few hoops at the start, but I'm sure you will have a queue outside the building and down the road for those good operators to get delegated authority to get down to 5 checks and use technology as well. Feed the photos into a single depository, and often, you don't have to physically be there, you just have to have a record that something was done. But on that note, and this is for SME owners as well as any government leaders who wish to listen to this episode, going back to engaging your workforce. So the poor attendance rate that I was talking about, why would you be inspired as a team member to work for or with or alongside a leader that hardly turns up or turns up late? And this might be 5 or 10 minutes. Sorry, the traffic was busy, but you're holding a cup of coffee. So you've already demonstrated that you're running late, but stopping and getting your $8 coffee was still a priority over your team members. And this goes back to the research Gallup, the organization, multinational around the world. They've been doing this for multiple decades now, and they have found that an engaged workforce performs, I say 20%, I think it's about 19.6% or 19.7%, but an engaged workforce performs 20% better than a disengaged workforce. So going back to either you could be a 5-person SME or a major government agency, if your leadership are just engaging and inspiring what you're doing and taking an interest and helping you just at least figure out what a better way of doing things and just showing some care, you'll get a lift in performance of 20%.
Sounds dangerously like you'll be over the tariffs already.
Exactly. It is that easy.
Show up on time, skip the coffee, done.
Okay.
Well, but you said there were, for example, councillors who are showing up 20% of the time.
Yeah.
So they're actually asked backwards already. So, I mean, imagine if they just showed up 80% of the time. Jeez, that'd be amazing.
It would be amazing. Imagine if they turned up 10 minutes early and walked around the council building and just talked to a couple of team leaders or even just every 1 or 2 people each time and just asked, what's going on the shop floor? What's bugging you? Okay, I'll just write that down and I'll remember when that comes relevant, I'll pull it out. Thank you. Or at least if it's anything significant, I'll throw that to the CEO of the council. If you did that, you would get a lift in your organisation by 20%. And this is what Barley Patter goes on. It was one of the best lean books that wasn't a lean book, but it was about Lego. So it was one reason why I brought it. But it was just understanding the problems and the frustration the team are having and dealing with that. So when you need to get a bit of information or you get a product out on time, just spend a bit of time giving a shit.
So we've started talking about the bigger question around what good actually looks like. Because if we want to have consistent and high-performing leadership, it's got to come from the top. Dave Bunting, there's someone who's already modelling it. Minister Penk talked about a number of different government agencies that are doing quite well as well. But it's not just about setting direction. It's about executing, measuring, and being accountable, actually showing up, not just with the coffee for you, but maybe with the coffee for all of your team, because now you're starting to earn trust. And if we can build that up through the system, then we can start leading national conversations about performance. Now, we called out Singapore and Norway in our column for a reason, because they're not just writing plans, they're delivering on them, and they're operating like high-performing organizations. I went to Singapore a couple of years ago, and I was just amazed. Got these massive construction projects going on, and right next to them, you've just got all your normal stuff going, traffic through the streets, people going back and forth, day-to-day business being conducted. Just crazy. They've got this long-term plan. They've got integrated public-private partnerships, and they're executing. Norway, I've never been to Norway, but they've got the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world. where they've been investing the profits they've been making from their oil reserves, which now are giving them options to invest into other parts of their economy. I think they're one of the leaders in clean technology, as an example, right? So these are nations that are actually leading the way that we can probably hold up and follow. We've got a last calculation, I think it's a $60 billion superannuation fund, yet we're investing a lot of that offshore. Maybe there are some opportunities to create public-private partnerships, NZ Super Fund, maybe some of the major banks, things like that, to actually support businesses to get access to capital, provided they've got the right plans that they can demonstrate. I mean, I don't know. What do you think?
I think that's, long term, we've got a long way to go at that level in New Zealand for maturity. I think there is probably more bang for your buck to get that energy from the ground level up, to be honest, because I think there is a significant amount of work in the culture of the thinking and I guess the cross-party collaboration around some of those major plans and thinking. And productivity is just one of those classic examples where everyone sort of sits there and goes, it's our biggest issue and it's the biggest problem and the biggest opportunity, yet nothing happens. So I think it is really up to the SME and the private sector really to start going, well, F you, we've listened for far too long. We can actually drive change and actually make a difference. And if they pick up some extra tax because of it, so be it. And we shouldn't be focused just on the export leading organisations either. We definitely need to be pushing hard and encouraging and lifting performance in the whole ecosystem. That does support our top performing exporters as well. Because if we, looking at local government, those stats, leadership, if we just get people who are getting excited about just pulling each other down all the time, nothing's going to happen.
Yeah, I agree. I think we almost need to act at a business level like the government may not look to lift its game.
Yep.
Because then if we operate with that basis, we can then start taking action ourselves as individual business leaders, businesses, groups of businesses, chambers, whatever, however that looks as that rolls out across the business landscape. But then as the government does start changing things and raising the bar and creating opportunities or programs for businesses to connect into, then we're already taking action and it's much easier to plug into those things, as opposed to going, hey, we've got a free $25,000 for any business that's got a business plan and can demonstrate KPIs and a history of achievement and these sorts of things. Well, nobody's got that except for maybe the guys at AGP and a handful of other high-end exporters or manufacturers. But if people started getting those disciplines and actions and assets in place, then we could start connecting into the different programs that do exist or programs that will exist as the government realizes there's a real opportunity here, right?
Yep. And at the same time, it doesn't take a lot of extra effort or investment just to start some of this stuff. And I used to say this to staff that I managed when I was in the public sector is, you almost got to prove your worth, earn the stripes before you put your cap out. Earn that right to ask, earn that right to create that opportunity, demonstrate that you can actually do it. Yeah, I definitely think that there needs to be some form of, more accountability, I think, in government-led organisations.
So you've seen how strategy and discipline drive high performance in SMBs. What would it look like if a government agency operated with the same mindset?
Well, they do. They all have plans. They are legislated to have plans. They all get signed off by their relevant ministers each year. But I think that's why I think that might be some of the smokes and mirrors that happen out there, is that some of those plans, a lot of them do get delivered. A lot of them, the achievements are there, But I think it is that sense of urgency within the whole engine that needs to kind of lift. And dare I say it, agreeing with David Seymour, and this isn't red tape, it's just, I think this goes back to what Minister Penk said, there just doesn't seem to be that urgency in public sector roles that there is in private sector. And all you need is one leader to demonstrate that it can be done. That's the challenge out there, I guess.
As we said in the article, we don't just have a business performance problem. We have a systems leadership problem. But the good news is leadership is a choice, from the cabinet table to the shop floor. The right kind of leadership can set the standard and lift performance for everyone. So as we wrap up, here's the bottom line. Leadership from the top isn't about authority. It's about consistency, clarity, and execution. We've seen some promising signs, from transparency efforts to outcome-based reform. But the bigger challenge is turning those isolated examples into a system-wide standard. If government wants to lead national conversations on productivity, it has to earn the right by modelling what good looks like, not just setting expectations for others. And for those of us in business, the challenge is the same. Define success, share your metrics, and deliver. Don't wait for permission, lead by example. Because whether you're in cabinet or the shop floor, real leadership is about owning the outcome. Thank you, and we'll see you again next time.